We won't read about Burzy, but we'll read The Child of the Forest. Once, so long ago, our great-grandfathers could scarcely have heard it mentioned, there lived within the great forest of Burzy a wood nymph named Necile. She was closely related to the mighty Queen Zurline, and her home was beneath the shade of a wide-spreading oak. Once every year on budding day, the trees put forth the new buds. Necile held the golden chalice of Ak to the lips of the queen, who drank therefrom to the prosperity of the forest. So you see, she was a nymph of some importance, and moreover, it said she was highly regarded because of her beauty and grace. When she was created, she could not have told. Queen Zurline could not have told. The great Ak himself could not have told. It was long ago when the world was new, and nymphs were needed to guard the forest and to minister the wants of the young trees. Then, on some day not remembered, the seal sprang into being, radiant, lovely, and straight, and slim as the sapling she was created to guard. Her hair was the color that lines a chestnut burr. Her eyes were blue in the sunlight and purple in the shade. Her cheeks bloomed with the faint pink that edges the clouds at sunset. Her lips were full red, pouting and sweet. For costume, she adopted oak leaf green. All the wood nymphs dressed in that color, and no other so desirable. Her dainty feet were sandal-clad, while her head remained bare of covering other than her silken tresses. Necile's duties were few and simple. She kept hurtful weeds from growing beneath her trees and sapping the earth food required by her charges. She frightened away the gadgulls, who took evil delight in flying against the tree trunks and wounding them so that they drooped and died from the poisonous contact. In dry season, she carried water from the brooks and pools and moistened the roots of her thirsty dependents. That was in the beginning. The weeds had now learned to avoid the forest where the wood nymphs dwelt. The loathsome gadgulls no longer dare come nigh. The trees have become old and sturdy and can bear the drought better when fresh sprouted. So Necile's duties were lessened, and as time grew laggard. This is not erotica. It's the story of Santa. Wrong kind of nymph story, Mr. Rogath. Truly, the forest dwellers did not lack amusement. Each full moon they danced in the royal circle of the queen. There were also the Feast of Nuts, the Jubilee of Autumn Tintings, the solemn ceremony of leaf shedding, and the revelry of budding day. I heard nymph and thought it was my kind of story. Now. But these periods of enjoyment were far apart and left many weary hours in between. That a wood nymph should grow discontented was not thought of by Necile's sisters. It came upon her after so many years of brooding. But when once she had settled in her mind that life was irksome, she had no patience with her condition, and longed to do something of real interest, and to pass her days in hitherto undreamed of by forest nymphs. The law of the forest alone restrained her from going forth in search of adventure. While this mood lay heavy upon pretty Necile, it chanced that the great Ak visited the forest of Burzy, and allowed the wood nymphs, as their wont, to lie at his feet and listen to the words of wisdom that fell from his lips. Ak is the master woodman of the world, and sees everything, and knows more than the sons of men. That night he held the queen's hand, for he loved the nymphs as the father loves his children, and Necile lay at his feet with many of her sisters, and earnestly hearkened as he spoke. We live so happily, my fair ones, in our forest glades, said Ak, stroking his grizzled beard thoughtfully, that we know nothing of the sorrow and misery that fall to the lot of those poor mortals who inhabit the open spaces of the earth. They are not of our race, it's true, yet compassion well befits beings so fairly favored as ourselves. Often as I pass by the dwelling of some suffering mortal, I am tempted to stop and banish the poor thing's misery. Yet suffering in moderation is the natural lot of mortals, and it is not our place to interfere with the laws of nature. Nevertheless, said the fair queen, nodding her golden head at the master woodsman, it would not be a vain guess that Ak has often assisted these hapless mortals. Ak smiled. Sometimes, he replied, when they are very young, children the mortals call them, I have stopped to rescue them from misery. The men and women I dare not interfere with, they must bear the burdens nature have imposed upon him. But the helpless infants, the innocent children of men, have a right to be happy until they become full grown and able to bear the trials of humanity. So I feel like I am justified in assisting them. Not long ago, a year maybe, I found 4 poor children huddled in a wooded hut, slowly freezing to death. Their parents had gone to a neighboring village for food, and had left a fire to warm the little ones while they were absent. But a storm arose and drifted the snow in their path, so they were long on the road. Meantime the fire went out, and the frost crept in the bones of the waiting children. Poor things, murmured the queen softly. What did you do? I called Nelko. bidding him fetch wood from my forest and breathe upon it until the fire blazed again and warmed the little room where the children lay. Then they ceased shivering and fell asleep until their parents came. I'm glad you did thus, said the good queen, beaming upon the master, and Necile, who had eagerly listened to every word, echoed in a whisper, I too am glad. And this very night, continued Ak, as I came to the edge of Burzee, I heard a feeble cry, which I judged from a human infant. I looked about me and found, close to the forest, a helpless babe, lying quite naked upon the grasses and wailing piteously. Not far away, screened by the forest, crouched Shigera, the lioness, intent upon devouring them for her evening meal. What did you do, Ak? Said the queen breathlessly. Not much, being in a hurry to greet my nymphs. But I commanded Shigera to lie close to the babe and give it her milk to quiet its hunger. And I told her to send word throughout the forest to all beasts and reptiles that the child should not be harmed. I'm glad you did thus, said the good queen again, in a tone of relief. But this time Necile did not echo her words, for the nymph, filled with a strange resolve, had stolen away from the group. Swiftly her lithe form darted through the forest paths until she reached the edge of the mighty Burzee, when she paused to gaze curiously about her. Never until now had she ventured so far, for the law of the forest had placed the nymphs in its inmost depths. Necile knew she was breaking the law, but she did not give pause to her dainty feet. She decided to see with her own eyes this infant Ak had told her of, for she never yet beheld a child of man. All the immortals are full grown, there are no children among them. Peering through the trees, Necile saw the child lying on the grass, but it was now sweetly sleeping, having been comforted by the milk drawn from Shigera. It was not old enough to know what peril means. If it did not feel hunger, it was content. Softly the nymph stole to the side of the babe and knelt upon the sward, her long robe of rose-leaf color spreading about her like a gossamer cloud. Her lovely countenance expressed curiosity and surprise, but most of all, a tender, womanly pity. The babe was newborn, chubby and pink. It was entirely helpless. While the nymph gazed at the infant, opened its eyes, smiled upon her, and stretched out two dimpled arms. In another instant, Necile had caught it to her breast and was hurrying through the forest path. The adoption. The master woodsman suddenly rose with knitted brows. There are strange presence in the forest, he declared. Then the queen and her nymphs turned and saw standing before them Necile, the sleeping infant clasped tightly in her arms, and a defiant look in her deep blue eyes. And thus for a moment they remained, the nymphs filled with surprise and consternation. The brow of the master woodsman gradually clearing as he gazed intently upon the beautiful immortal who had willfully broken the law. Then the great Ak, to the wonder of all, laid his hand softly on Necile's flowing locks and kissed her on the fair forehead. For the first time within my knowledge, he said gently, the nymph has defied me and my laws, yet in my heart I can find no word of chiding. What is your desire, Necile? Let me keep the child, she answered, beginning to tremble and falling her knees in supplication. Here in the forest of Burzee, where the human race has never yet penetrated? Questioned Ak. Here in the forest of Burzee, replied the nymph boldly. It is my home, and I am weary for lack of occupation. Let me care for the babe. See how weak and helpless it is. Surely it cannot harm Burzee, nor the master woodsman of the world. But the law, child, the law, cried Ak sternly. The law is made by the master woodsman, returned Necile. If he bids me care for the babe whom he himself has saved from death, who in the world dare oppose me? Queen Zerline, who had listened intently to the conversation, clapped her pretty hands gracefully at the nymph's answer. You are fairly trapped, O Ak, she exclaimed, laughing. Now I pray you give heed to Necile's petition. The woodsman, as was his habit when in thought, stroked his grizzled beard slowly. Then he said, She shall keep the babe, and I will give it my protection. But I warn you all that this is the first time I have relaxed the law, so it shall be the last time. Nevermore to the end of the world shall a mortal be adopted by an immortal. Otherwise we would abandon our happy existence for one of trouble and anxiety. Good night, my nymphs. Then Ak was gone, and from their midst, and Necile hurried away to her bower to rejoice over her newfound treasure. 4. Claus. Another day found Necile's bower the most popular place in the forest. The nymphs clustered around her and the child that lay asleep in her lap with expressions of curiosity and delight. Nor are they wanting in praise for the Ak's kindness in allowing Necile to keep the babe and to care for it. Even the queen came to peer in the innocent childish face and to hold a helpless, chubby fist in her own fair hand. What shall we call him, Necile? She asked, smiling. He must have a name, you know. Let him be called Claus, answered Necile, for that means a little one. Rather let him be called Nicholas, returned the queen. for that will mean Nasile's little one. The nymphs clapped their hands in delight, and Claus came the infant's name, although Nasile loved to call him Claus, and in after days many of her sisters followed her example. Nasile gave the softest moss in all the forest for Claus to lie upon, and she made his bed in her own bower. Of the food the infant had no lack. The nymphs searched the forest for bell udders which grow upon the goa tree, and when opened to be found with sweet milk. And the soft-eyed does willingly gave a share of their milk to support the little stranger, while Shigra, the lioness, often crept stealthily into Nasile's bower and purred softly as she lay beside the babe and fed it. So the little one flourished and grew big and sturdy day by day, while Nasile taught him to speak and walk and to play. His thoughts and words were sweet and gentle, for the nymphs knew no evil and their hearts were pure and loving. He became the pet of the forest, for Axe decreed a forbidden beast or reptile to molest him, and he walked fearlessly wherever his will guided him. Presently the news reached the other immortals that the nymphs of Burzee had adopted a human infant, and the act had been sanctioned by the great Ak. Therefore many of them came to visit the little stranger, looking upon him with such interest. First the Rills, who were first cousins to the wood nymphs, although so differently formed. For the Rills are required to watch over the flowers and plants, as the nymphs over the forest trees. They search the wide world for food required by the roots of the flowering plants, while the brilliant colors possessed by the full-blown flowers are due to the dyes placed in the soil by the rills, which are drawn through the little veins in the roots and the body of the plants as they reach maturity. The rills are a busy people, for their flowers bloom and fade continually, but they are merry and light-hearted and very popular with the other immortals. Next came the Knooks, whose duty it is to watch over the beasts of the world, both gentle and wild. The Knooks have a hard time of it, since many of the beasts are ungovernable and rebel against restraint. But they know how to manage them after all, and you will find that certain laws in the Knooks are obeyed even by the most ferocious animals. Their anxieties make the Knooks look old and worn and crooked, and their natures are a bit rough from associating with wild creatures continually. Yet they are most useful to humanity and the world in general, as their laws are the only laws the forest beasts recognize, except for those of the Master Woodsman. Then there were the fairies, the guardians of mankind, who are much interested in the adoption of Claus because their own laws forbid them to become familiar with the human charges. And there are instances on record where the fairies have shown themselves to human beings and have even conversed with them, but they are supposed to guard the lives of mankind, unseen and unknown, and if they favor some people more than others, it is because they have won such distinction fairly, as the fairies are very just and impartial. But the idea of adopting a child of man had never occurred to them because it was in every way opposed to the laws, so their curiosity was intense to behold the little stranger adopted by Nasile and her sister nymphs. Claus looked upon the immortals who thronged around him with fearless eyes and smiling lips. He rode laughingly upon the shoulders of the merry rills. He mischievously pulled the gray beards of the low-browed Knooks. He rested his curly head confidently upon the dainty bosom of the fairy queen herself. And the rills loved the sound of his laughter, the Knooks loved his courage, the fairies loved his innocence. The boy made friends with them all and learned to know their laws intimately. Though a forest flower was trampled beneath his feet, lest the friendly rills should be grieved. He never interfered with the beasts of the forest, lest his friend the Knooks become angry. Their fairies he loved dearly, but knowing nothing of mankind, he could not understand that he was the only one of his race admitted to friendly intercourse with them. Indeed, Claus came to consider that he alone, of all the forest people, had no light nor fellow. Then the forest was the world. He had no idea that millions of toiling, striving humans creatures existed, and he was happy and content. Excuse me for 1 second. Sorry about that. Let's see. I don't want to read all these, so let's scroll through. The Laughing Valley. Oh, here we go. The great battle between good and evil. Ak listened gravely to the recital of Claus, stroking his beard the while with slow, graceful motion that betokened deep thought. He nodded approvingly when Claus told him how the Knooks and the fairies had saved him from death, and frowned when he heard how the Alguas had stolen the children's toys. At last he said, "From the beginning I have proved the work you are doing amongst the children of men, and it annoys me that your good deeds should be thwarted by the Alguas. We immortals have no connection whatsoever with the evil creatures who have attacked you. Always have we avoided them, and they in turn have hitherto taken care not to cross our pathway. And in this matter, I find that they have interfered with one of our friends, and I will ask them to abandon their persecutions, as you are under our protection." Claus thanked the Master Woodsman most gratefully and returned to his valley, while Ak, who never delayed in carrying out his promises, at once traveled to the mountains of the Aguas. There, standing on the lower, bare rocks, he called on the king and his people to appear. Instantly, the place was filled with throngs of the scowling Aguas, and their king, perching himself on a point of rock, demanded fiercely, "Who dares call on us?" "It is I, the Master Woodsman of the world," responded Ak. "Here are no forests for you to claim," said the king angrily. "We owe no allegiance to you, nor any immortal." "That is true," replied Ak calmly. "Yet you have ventured to interfere with the actions of Claus, who dwells in the Laughing Valley, and is under our protection." Many of the Aguas began muttering at this speech, and their king turned threateningly on the Master Woodsman. "You are set to rule the forest, but the plains and the valleys are ours," he shouted. "Keep to your own dark woods. Will do as we please with Claus." "You shall not harm our friend in any way," replied Ak. "Shall we not?" asked the king impudently. "You will see our powers are vastly superior to those of mortals, and fully as great as those as immortals." "It is your conceit that misleads you," said Ak sternly. "You are a transient race, passing from life into nothingness. We who live forever pity you, but despise you. On earth you are scorned by all, and in heaven you have no place. Even the mortals, after their earth life, spend another existence for all time, and so are your superiors. How then dare you, who are neither immortal nor immortal, refuse to obey my wish?" The Aguas sprang to their feet with menacing gestures, but their king motioned them back. "Never before," he cried to Ak, while his voice trembled with rage, "has an immortal declared himself the master of the Aguas. Never shall an immortal venture to interfere with our actions again, for we will avenge your scornful words by killing your friend Claus within 3 days. Nor you, nor all the immortals can save him from our wrath. We defy your powers. Begone, Master Woodsman of the world. In the country of the Aguas you have no place." "It is war," declared Ak with flashing eyes. "It is war," retained the king savagely. "In 3 days your friend will be dead." The master turned away and came to his forest of Burzy, where he caught a meeting of the immortals and told them of the defiance of the Aguas and their purpose to kill Claus within 3 days. The little folk listened to him quietly. "What shall we do?" asked Ak. "These creatures are of no benefit to the world," said the Prince of the Nooks. "We must destroy them." "Their lives are devoted to only evil deeds," said the Prince of the Rills. "We must destroy them. They have no conscience and endeavor to make all immortals as bad as themselves," said the Queen of the Fairies. "We must destroy them." "They have defied the great Ak and threatened the life of our adopted son," said the beautiful Queen Zerline. "We must destroy them." The Master Woodsman smiled. "You speak well," he said. "These Aguas we know to be a powerful race, and they will fight desperately. Yet the outcome is certain. For we who can live can never die, even though conquered by our enemies. While every Agua who is struck down is one foe less to oppose us. Prepare then for battle, and let us resolve to show no mercy to the wicked." Thus arose the terrible war between the immortals and the spirit of evil, which is sung in the fairyland to this day. The King Agua and his band determined to carry out the threat to destroy Claus. They now hated him for 2 reasons. He made children happy and was a friend of the Master Woodsman. But at Ak's visit they had reason to fear the opposition of the mortals, and they dreaded defeat. So the king sent swift messengers to all parts of the world to summon every evil creature to his aid. On the 3rd day after the declaration of war, a mighty army was the command for the King Agua. There were 300 Asiatic dragons breathing fire that consumed everything it touched. These hated mankind and all good spirits. And then there were 3-eyed giants of Tartary, a host in themselves who liked nothing better than to fight. And next came the black demons from Patagonia with great spreading wings like those of a bat, which swept terror and misery through the world as they beat upon the air. And joined to these were the Goozle Goblins, with long talons and striped swords, with which they clawed the flesh from their foes. Finally, every mountain Agua of the world had come to participate in the great battle with the immortals. And the King Agua looked around this vast army and held his heart beat high with wicked pride, for he believed he would surely triumph over his gentle enemies, who had never before been known to fight. But the Master Woodsman had not been idle. None of his people were used to warfare, yet now they were called upon the face of hosts of evil. They were willing prepared for the fray. Ak had commanded them to assemble in Laughing Valley, where Claus, ignorant of the terrible battle that was to be waged on his account, was quietly making his toys. Soon the entire valley, from hill to hill, was filled with little immortals. The Master Woodsman stood first, bearing a gleaming axe that shone like burnished silver. Next came the Ryls, armed with sharp thorns from bramble bushes. And then the Knooks, bearing the spears they used for which they were forced to prod their savage beasts in submission. The fairies, dressed in white gauze and with rainbow-hued wings, bore golden wands, and the woods nymphs in their uniforms of oak green leaf carried switches from ash trees as weapons. Loud laughed the Agua Queen who beheld the size and arms of his foe. To be sure, the mighty axe of the woodsman was to be dreaded, but the sweet-faced nymphs and pretty fairies, the gentle Ryls and crooked Knooks, were such harmless folk that he almost felt shame of having called a terrible host to oppose them. "Since these fools dare fight," he said to the leader of Tartary giants, "I will overwhelm them with our evil powers." To begin the battle, he poised the great stone in his left hand and cast it full against the sturdy form of the Master Woodsman, who turned it aside with his axe. Then rushed the three-eyed giants of Tartary upon the Knooks, and the Goozle Goblins upon the Ryls, and the fire-breathing dragons upon the sweet fairies. These the nymphs for Axe own people, the band of Agua sought them out, thinking to overcome them with ease. But it is the law that while evil unopposed may accomplish terrible deeds, the power of good can never be overthrown when opposed to evil. Well had been for the King Agua had he known the law. His ignorance cost him his existence, for one flash of the axe, borne by Master Woodsman of the world, cleft the wicked in twain, king in twain, and the earth of the vilest creature it contained. Greatly marveled the Tartary giants when the spears of the little Knooks pierced the thick walls of flesh and sent them reeling to the ground with howls of agony. Woe became the sharp-taloned goblins when the thorns of the Ryls reached their savage hearts and let their lifeblood sprinkle all the plain, and afterwards from every drop a thistle grew. The dragons paused astonished before the fairy wand, from whence rushed a power that caused their fire breaths to flow back on themselves, so that they shriveled away and died. As for the Aguas, they had scant time to realize how they were destroyed, for the ash switches of the nymphs bore charm unknown to any Agua, and turned their foes into clods of earth at the slightest touch. When Ak leaned upon his gleaming axe and turned to look over the field of battle, he saw the few giants who were able to run disappearing over the distant hills on their return to Tartary. The goblins had perished every one, and as the terrible dragons, while all that remained of the wicked Aguas was a great number of earthen hillocks dotting the plain. And now the immortals melted from the valley like dew on sunrise to resume their duties in the forest, while Ak slowly and thoughtfully to the house of Claus and entered. "We have many toys ready for the children," said the woodsman, "and you may now carry them across the plain to the dwellings and villages without fear." "Will the Aguas not harm me?" said Claus eagerly. "The Aguas," said Ak, "have perished. Now I will gladly have done with wicked spirits and fighting and bloodshed. It is not from choice that I told of the Aguas and their allies and of their great battle with immortals. They were part of this history and could not be avoided." Alright, we'll need to read the next one. It's the first journey with the reindeer, and then we'll read 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. Those were happy days for Claus when he carried his accumulation of toys to the children who had awaited them for so long. During his imprisonment in the valley, he had been so industrious that all his shelves were filled with playthings, and after quickly supplying the little ones living near, he saw he must now extend his travels to wider fields. Remembering the time when he had journeyed with Ak through all the world, he knew children were everywhere, and he longed to make as many as possible happy with his gifts. So he loaded a great sack with all kinds of toys, slung it on his back that he might carry it more easily, and started off on a longer trip than he had yet undertaken. Wherever he showed his merry face, in hamlet or farmhouse, he received a cordial welcome, for his fame had spread into far lands. At each village, the children swarmed about him, following his footsteps wherever he went, and the women thanked him gratefully for the joy he brought the little ones. And the men looked upon him curiously that he should devote his time to such a queer occupation as toy-making. But everyone smiled on him and gave him kindly words, and Claus felt amply repaid for his long journey. When the sack was empty, he went back to the Laughing Valley and once more filled it to the brim. This time he followed another road into a different part of the country and carried happiness to many children who never before had owned a toy or guessed that such a delightful plaything existed. And after a third journey, so far away that Claus was many days walking the distance, the store of toys became exhausted, and without delay, he set about making a fresh supply. From seeing so many children and studying their tastes, he had acquired several new ideas about toys. The dolly is where he had found the most delightful of all playthings for babies and little girls, and often those who would not say dolly would call for a doll in their sweet baby talk. So Claus resolved to make many dolls of all sizes and to dress them in bright colored clothing. The older boys, and even some of the girls, loved the images of animals, so he made cats and elephants and horses. And so many of the little fellows had musical natures and longed for drums and cymbals and whistles and horns. So he made a number of toy drums with tiny sticks to beat them with, and he made whistles from the willow trees and horns from the bog reeds and cymbals from bits of beaten metal. All this kept him busily at work, and before he realized it, the winter season came, with deeper snows than usual, and he knew he could not leave the valley with his heavy pack. Moreover, the next trip would take him further than home than ever before. Jack Frost was mischievous enough to nip his nose and ears as if he took the long journey while the Frost King reigned. Frost King was Jack's father and never reproved him for his pranks. So Claus remained at his workbench, but he whistled and sang as merrily as ever, for he would allow no disappointment to sour his temper and to make him unhappy. One bright morning he looked from his window and saw 2 of the deer he had known in the forest walking toward his house. Claus was surprised, not that the friendly deer should visit him, that they walked on the surface of the snow as easily as if it were solid ground, notwithstanding the fact that throughout the valley the snow lay many feet deep. He walked out of his house a day or 2 before and sunk to his armpits in a drift. So when the deer came, he opened the door and called to them, "Good morning, Flossie. Tell me how you were able to walk on the snow so easily." "It's frozen hard," answered Flossie. "The Frost King had breathed on it," said Glossie, coming up, "and the surface is now as solid as ice." "Perhaps," remarked Claus thoughtfully, "I might now carry my pack of toys to the children." "Is it a long journey?" asked Flossie. "Yes, it will take me many days, for the pack is heavy," answered Claus. "Then the snow would melt before you get back," said the deer. "You must wait until spring, Claus." Claus sighed. "Had are your fleet feet," he said. "I can make the journey in a day." "But you have not," returned Glossie, licking his own slender legs with pride. "Perhaps I could ride upon your back," Claus ventured to remark after a pause. "Oh no, our backs are not strong enough to bear your weight," said Flossie decidedly. "But if you had a sledge and could harness us to it, we might draw you easily and your pack as well." "I'll make a sledge," exclaimed Claus. "Will you agree to draw me if I do?" "Well," replied Flossie, "we must first go and ask the Knooks, for our guardians, for permission. And if they consent and you can make a sledge and a harness, we will gladly assist you." "Then go at once," cried Claus eagerly. "I'm sure the friendly Knooks will give their consent, and by the time you are back, I should be ready to harness you to my sledge." Flossie and Glossie, being deer and much intelligence, had long wished to see the great world, so they gladly ran over the frozen snow to ask the Knooks if they might carry Claus on his journey. Meantime, the toy maker hurriedly began the construction of a sledge, using material from his woodpile. He made 2 long runners, then turned upward at the front ends, and across these nailed short boards to make a platform. It was soon completed, but it was rude in appearance as if possible for a sledge to be. The harness was more difficult to prepare, but Claus twisted long, strong cords together and knotted them so they would fit around the necks of the deer in the shape of a collar. From these ran other cords to fasten the deer to the front of the sledge. And before the work was completed, Glossie and Flossie were back from the forest, having been granted permission by Will Knook to make the journey with Claus, provided they would to Bursey by daybreak the next morning. "That is not a very long time," said Flossie. "We are swift and strong, and if we get started by this evening, we could travel many miles during the night." Claus decided to make the attempt, so he hurried on his preparations as fast as possible. After a time, he fastened the collars around the necks of his steeds and harnessed them to his rude sledge. Then he placed a stool on the little platform to serve as a seat and filled a sack with his prettiest toys. "How do you intend to guide us?" asked Glossie. "We have never been out of the forest before, except to visit your house, so we shall not know the way." Claus thought about that for a moment, and then he brought more cords and passed 2 of them to the spreading antlers of each deer, one on the right and the other on the left. "Those will be my reins," said Claus, "and when I pull them to the right or to the left, you must go in that direction. If I do not pull the reins at all, you may go straight ahead." "Very well," answered Glossie and Flossie, and then they asked, "Are you ready?" Claus seated himself upon the stool, placed the sack of toys at his feet, and then gathered up the reins. "All ready," he shouted. "Away we go!" The deer leaned forward, lifted their slender limbs, and the next moment flew the sledge over the frozen snow. The swiftness and the motion surprised Claus, for in a few strides they were across the valley, gliding over the broad plain beyond. The day had just melted in the evening by the time they started, for swiftly as Claus had worked, many hours had been consumed in making his preparations. But the moon shone brightly to light their way, and Claus soon decided it was just as pleasant to travel by night as by day. The deer liked it better, for, although they wished to see something of the world, they were timid about meeting men, and now all the dwellers in the towns and farmhouses were sound asleep and could not see them. Away and away they sped, and up and over the hills, through the valleys, across the plains, until they reached a village where Claus had never been before. Here he called on them to stop, and they immediately obeyed. But a new difficulty now presented itself, for the people had locked their doors when they went to bed, and Claus found he could not enter the houses to leave his toys. "I am afraid, my friends, we have made our journey for nothing," said he, "for I shall be obliged to carry my playthings back home again without giving them to the children of this village." "What's the matter?" asked Flossie. "The doors are locked," answered Claus, "and I cannot get in." Flossie looked around at the houses. The snow was quite deep in that village, and just before them was a roof only a few feet above the sledge. A broad chimney, which seemed to Glossie big enough to admit Claus, was at the peak of the roof. "Why don't you climb down that chimney?" asked Glossie. Claus looked at it. "It would be easy enough if I were on top of the roof," he answered. "Then hold fast and we will take you there," said the deer, and they gave one bound to the roof and landed beside the big chimney. "Good!" cried Claus, well pleased, and he slung the pack of toys over his shoulder and got to the chimney. There was plenty of soot on the bricks, but he did not mind that, and by placing his hands and the knees against the sides, he crept downward until he reached the fireplace. Leaping lightly over the smoldering coals, he found himself in a large sitting room, where a dim light was burning. From this room, two doors led into smaller chambers, and one woman lay asleep with the baby beside her in her crib. Claus laughed, but he did not laugh aloud for fear of waking the baby. Then he slipped a big doll from his pack and laid it in the crib. The little one smiled as if it dreamed of the pretty plaything it was to find on the morrow, and Claus crept slowly from the room and entered at the other doorway. Here were two boys fast asleep with their arms around each other's necks. Claus gazed at them lovingly a moment and then placed upon the bed a drum, two horns, and a wooden elephant. He did not linger now that his work in this house was done, but climbed the chimney again and seated himself on his sledge. "Can you find another chimney?" he asked the reindeer. "Easily enough," replied Glossie and Flossie. Down to the edge of the roof they raced, and then without pausing, leaped through the air to atop the next building, where a huge old-fashioned chimney stood. "Don't be so long this time," called Flossie, "or we shall never get back to the forest by daybreak." Claus made a trip down this chimney also and found 5 children sleeping in the house, all of which were quickly supplied with toys. When he returned, the deer sprang to the next roof, but on descending the chimney, Claus found no children there at all. That was not often the case in this village, however, so he lost less time than you might suppose in visiting the dreary homes where there were no little ones. Once he climbed down the chimneys of all the houses in that village and left a toy for every sleeping child, Claus found that his great sack was not yet half empty. "Onward, friends," he called to the deer. "We must seek another village." So away they dashed, although it was long past midnight. In a surprisingly short time, they came to a large city, the largest Claus had ever visited since he began to make toys. But nothing daunted by the throng of houses, he set to work at once, and his beautiful steeds carried him rapidly from one roof to the other, only the highest being beyond the leaps of agile deer. At last the supply of toys was exhausted, and Claus seated himself in the sledge with the empty sack at his feet and turned the heads of Glossie and Flossie toward home. Presently Flossie asked, "What is that gray streak in the sky?" "It is the coming of day," answered Claus, surprised to find it was so late. "Good gracious!" exclaimed Glossie. "And we shall not be home by daybreak, and the Knooks will punish us and will never let us come again." "We must race for the Laughing Valley and make our best speed," returned Flossie. "So hold fast, friend Claus." Claus held fast, and the next moment he was flying so swiftly over the snow that he could not see the trees as they whirled past. Up hill and down dale, swift as an arrow shot from a bow, they dashed, and Claus shut his eyes to keep the wind out of them and left the deer to find their own way. It seemed to him they were plunging through space, but he was not at all afraid. The Knooks were severe masters and must obey all hazards, and the gray streak in the sky was growing brighter every moment. Finally, his sledge came to a sudden stop. Claus, who was taken unawares, tumbled from his seat into a snowdrift. As he picked himself up, he heard the deer crying, "Quick, friend, quick, cut away your harness." He drew his knife and rapidly severed the cords, and then he wiped from the moisture from his eyes and looked around him. The sled had come to a stop in the Laughing Valley, only a few feet, he found, from his own door. In the east, the day was breaking, and to the edge of the Burzia he saw Glossie and Flossie just disappearing in the forest. All right, so that's how Claus did